I never expected my best friend to show up at my door with a suitcase and a secret he had been carrying for years. But when Ryan Mitchell looked at me that evening and said, "I only need 1 week, but there is something I have wanted to tell you for a long time," I had no idea those words would change everything I thought I knew about us. My name is Ethan Carter, and Ryan had been part of my life for almost a decade. We met during college, when two completely different people somehow became inseparable. I was the person who preferred quiet weekends, small coffee shops, and planning everything before making a decision. Ryan was the opposite. He loved spontaneous adventures, meeting new people, and turning ordinary days into stories worth remembering. Somehow, our differences made us closer. Over the years, he became the person I called when something good happened, the person I trusted when life became difficult, and the person who always seemed to know what I needed before I said anything. So when my phone rang on a rainy Tuesday evening and Ryan asked if he could stay at my apartment for a week, my first reaction was simple. Of course. His apartment needed repairs after a maintenance issue, and he needed somewhere comfortable to stay while everything was being fixed. I did not even think twice before agreeing. After all, Ryan had spent years being there for me. Letting him stay for a week felt like the easiest decision in the world. When he arrived later that night, he stood outside my apartment holding a suitcase, a small bag of groceries, and the same familiar smile I had seen countless times before. "I promise I will not take over your living room," he joked. I laughed. "You once turned my entire kitchen into a cooking experiment. I think my living room will survive." He smiled because he knew exactly what I meant. That was Ryan. He remembered every small story, every inside joke, and every moment we had shared. The first few days felt surprisingly normal. We fell into the same rhythm we had during college. We made coffee in the morning, talked about our days after work, and stayed up late discussing everything from old memories to future dreams. It felt comfortable, almost too comfortable. But slowly, I started noticing things I had ignored before. Ryan still remembered exactly how I liked my coffee. He noticed when I had a stressful day even before I mentioned it. He always left the last piece of dessert for me, claiming he was not hungry. These were small things, things he had always done. Yet for some reason, during that week, they felt different. One evening, while we were sitting on opposite ends of the couch watching an old movie, Ryan became unusually quiet. I looked over and noticed him staring at his hands, lost in thought. "Are you okay?" I asked. He looked up and smiled. "Yeah, I am just thinking about how strange it is that we have known each other for so long." I laughed softly. "Strange? I would say predictable. You have been annoying me for years." Ryan smiled. "Maybe, but I think I am lucky you let me stay." I did not think much about that sentence at the time. I thought it was just another friendly comment from my oldest friend. I had no idea Ryan was not only talking about staying in my apartment for a week. He was talking about a truth he had been protecting for years, waiting for the right moment to finally tell me. The second morning with Ryan staying at my apartment felt strangely familiar, almost like we had returned to our college days when sharing a small space was just part of our everyday routine. I woke up to the smell of coffee and found him standing in my kitchen, carefully preparing breakfast while quietly humming a song we both used to listen to years ago. I smiled when I saw him. "You know you are a guest, right?" I joked. Ryan looked over his shoulder with a confident smile. "A guest who knows you never eat breakfast when you are busy." I wanted to argue, but I knew he was right. That was always the difficult thing about Ryan. He noticed everything. Throughout the week, I started realizing how naturally he fit into my life. We had always spent time together, but living under the same roof created a different kind of closeness. There were no distractions from busy schedules or separate apartments. We simply existed in the same space, sharing ordinary moments that somehow felt more meaningful than anything planned. After work, we cooked simple dinners together. Sometimes we talked about our day for hours. Other times we sat quietly while watching television, completely comfortable without needing to fill every second with conversation. I had always known Ryan was important to me, but this week made me notice how many small pieces of my daily happiness involved him. One evening, while organizing a bookshelf, I found an old photo album hidden behind some boxes. I opened it and immediately laughed. There were pictures from our college years, including one where Ryan and I were standing outside our old apartment holding cheap coffee cups and looking exhausted after a long week of exams. "I forgot we looked that tired," I said. Ryan walked over and smiled at the picture. "You were always trying to do everything perfectly." I laughed. "And you were always trying to convince me to relax." He nodded. "Maybe because you forgot that life was supposed to be enjoyed sometimes." We spent the next hour looking through memories we had not seen in years. Every picture reminded me of another story. The road trip where we got lost because Ryan refused to check the map. The birthday dinner where he accidentally ordered the wrong food, but insisted it was better than what we planned. The countless evenings where we sat outside talking about dreams we were not even sure we would achieve. What surprised me was how many details Ryan remembered. He knew the exact date of certain moments I had completely forgotten. He remembered the little things I said casually years ago, things that I never expected anyone to remember. "How do you keep track of all this?" I asked. Ryan smiled while looking through the photos. "Because those moments mattered to me." His answer was simple, but something about it stayed in my mind. Later that night, after we turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I found myself thinking about everything he had said. Ryan had always been the person who showed up, the person who stayed, the person who somehow made difficult days feel easier. Yet I had never stopped to ask myself why his presence felt so different from everyone else. The next morning, I noticed a small box on the kitchen counter. It was filled with old movie tickets, handwritten notes, and tiny reminders of memories we had shared over the years. Ryan quickly picked it up when he saw me looking. "It is nothing," he said. But the way he said it made me realize it was not nothing at all. It was something he had carefully kept, something connected to our past, something that made me wonder if this week was about more than just finding a temporary place to stay. The rest of the week settled into a comfortable routine that felt both wonderfully familiar and unexpectedly new. Every morning Ryan was already awake before me, making coffee exactly the way I liked it without ever asking if I wanted a cup. Every evening we cooked dinner together, laughed about work, and somehow managed to turn ordinary conversations into hours of easy companionship. Living together should have felt temporary, yet each passing day made it seem as though Ryan had always belonged in my apartment. One Saturday afternoon, rain began falling steadily outside, filling the apartment with the soft sound of water tapping against the windows. We decided to spend the afternoon cleaning old closets that I had ignored for years. Most of the boxes contained ordinary things like old textbooks, cables I no longer used, and forgotten kitchen supplies. Then, tucked beneath a stack of winter blankets, we found another storage box covered in dust. Ryan froze for just a second before quietly reaching toward it. "I forgot this was here," he said. I smiled. "Looks like we are about to discover what our younger selves decided to save." We carried the box into the living room and opened it together. Inside were old concert tickets, postcards from weekend trips, faded movie stubs, photographs, handwritten birthday cards, and small souvenirs from places we had visited over the years. Each object unlocked another memory. We laughed at the terrible hairstyles we once thought looked fashionable. We remembered late-night diner meals after final exams, spontaneous road trips along the Washington coast, and every ridiculous challenge Ryan somehow convinced me to join. I noticed that Ryan carefully picked up each item before placing it back exactly where it belonged. His movements were slow and almost protective. Finally, I held up a small envelope with my name written neatly across the front. "What is this?" I asked. Ryan looked genuinely surprised. "I thought I threw that away." I carefully opened it, expecting an old receipt or note from college. Instead, I found a simple birthday card I had written for him years earlier. I barely remembered it, but Ryan had kept it in perfect condition. "You saved this?" I asked quietly. He smiled with a hint of embarrassment. "You always wrote better birthday cards than anyone else." I laughed softly. "It was probably just a few sentences." "Maybe," he replied, "but they mattered to me." His answer lingered in the room long after he finished speaking. As we continued sorting through the box, I realized almost everything inside had something to do with moments we had shared together. It was as though Ryan had quietly collected pieces of our friendship while I simply lived through them. You really kept all of this? I asked again. He nodded. Some memories deserve a safe place. I looked around the apartment, then back at the photographs spread across the coffee table. For years I had believed our friendship moved naturally from one chapter to the next without much thought. Yet Ryan had preserved nearly every meaningful moment as though he never wanted to lose any part of our story. That evening we ordered pizza instead of cooking and watched another old movie we both loved. Ryan seemed quieter than usual, smiling at the screen but often drifting into thought. More than once I caught him looking toward the same storage box before quickly looking away again. I wanted to ask what he was thinking, but something inside me suggested he would tell me when he was ready. As the rain continued outside and the apartment filled with warm light and familiar laughter, I found myself wondering whether the most important memory connected to that old box had not been discovered yet. Whatever Ryan had carried with him for all these years, I could feel that the moment he finally shared it was getting closer with every passing day. By the fourth evening, the apartment no longer felt like it belonged to just one person. Ryan's suitcase was still neatly tucked beside the guest room bed. His favorite coffee mug sat next to mine in the kitchen, and his jacket rested on the chair by the front door as though it had always been there. It was surprising how quickly a temporary arrangement had begun to feel permanent. After dinner, dark clouds gathered outside and heavy rain soon covered the city. A sudden flash of lightning was followed by the apartment falling completely silent as every light went out. I looked toward the window and laughed softly. Well, I guess the weather made our evening plans for us. Ryan reached into one of the kitchen drawers and pulled out a small flashlight. Good thing you never throw anything away. I smiled. That is rich coming from the man who keeps birthday cards from 10 years ago. He laughed quietly, and for a moment the room felt warm despite the darkness. We found a few candles, placed them around the living room, and made hot tea while waiting for the electricity to return. The gentle candlelight softened everything around us, turning an ordinary apartment into a place that felt peaceful and strangely timeless. We sat near the large window, listening to the rain tapping steadily against the glass, while watching distant city lights disappear beneath the storm. Neither of us reached for a phone. Neither of us turned on music. The quiet seemed to invite conversations that never found room in busy, everyday life. Ryan wrapped both hands around his mug and looked out at the rain. Do you ever think about how quickly time moves? He asked. I nodded slowly. Sometimes it feels like college was only yesterday. He smiled. I still remember the first time we cooked dinner together. I laughed immediately. You nearly filled the apartment with smoke because you forgot the pasta was still boiling. Ryan pointed toward me. To be fair, you were supposed to remind me. I was studying. Exactly. You always had a plan. His smile faded into a thoughtful expression. I always admired that about you. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. Ryan rarely complimented people directly. He usually expressed appreciation through actions instead of words. I looked at him carefully. You have been thinking about something all week. He remained quiet for several seconds before answering. Maybe I have been thinking about something for much longer than 1 week. I waited, sensing that he wanted to continue. He looked down at the warm tea in his hands before speaking again. There are moments in life when telling the truth feels simple. Then there are moments when telling the truth feels like it could change everything. My heart beat a little faster, although I could not explain why. Is that what this week is really about? I asked gently. Ryan gave a small nod but did not immediately look at me. Partly, he admitted. The repairs at my apartment are real. I did need somewhere to stay. He paused and took a slow breath. But I also realized that if I kept waiting for the perfect moment, I might spend the rest of my life waiting. The rain continued falling outside, filling the silence between us with a steady rhythm. I did not interrupt because I felt that whatever Ryan wanted to say deserved patience instead of questions. He looked toward me for just a moment, offering a nervous smile that I had never seen before. I almost told you years ago, he said quietly. Then I convinced myself that staying silent was safer. Before I could respond, the apartment lights suddenly flickered back to life. The ordinary brightness returned, but neither of us moved. Somehow the room felt completely different than it had only minutes before. Ryan looked away with a quiet smile and whispered, "Maybe tomorrow." I nodded, even though every instinct told me that tomorrow would change both of our lives forever. The next morning felt different from every other day of that week. Nothing had changed on the surface. The same sunlight entered through the kitchen window, the same coffee machine made its familiar sound, and Ryan was still standing in my kitchen preparing breakfast like he had done every morning since he arrived. Yet something about the atmosphere between us had shifted. We both knew there was a conversation waiting. Neither of us wanted to rush it, but neither of us wanted to avoid it anymore. After breakfast, Ryan helped me clean the apartment, but I noticed he was quieter than usual. He moved through each task carefully, almost as if he was trying to memorize every ordinary moment. When we finished, he placed a small box on the coffee table. I recognized it immediately. It was the same box we had discovered while cleaning the closet. "I think it is time you know why I kept these things," he said. I sat down across from him, giving him my full attention. Ryan opened the box slowly and began taking out each item one by one. A movie ticket from our first college outing. A photograph from a road trip we almost canceled. A handwritten note from a difficult week when I had been questioning my own choices. Each object represented a moment I remembered, but Ryan remembered something more. He remembered how those moments made him feel. "I know this probably seems strange," he said with a small nervous smile, "but these were never just random things to me." I looked at the collection spread across the table. "Then what were they?" Ryan stayed silent for a few seconds before answering. "Proof." I tilted my head slightly. "Proof of what?" He looked down at the old photograph in his hand. "Proof that some people can become the most important part of your life without you realizing when it happened." His words settled quietly between us. I had heard Ryan say many meaningful things before, but this felt different. There was a weight behind every sentence. A truth that had been waiting for the right moment. "Ethan," he continued, "when I first met you, I thought I had just found a great friend. Someone who made college easier. Someone who made ordinary days better." He smiled softly. "But somewhere along the way, you became the person I looked for first whenever something happened. Good news, bad news, anything important. You were always the person I wanted to tell." I listened without interrupting. My mind started connecting memories I had never viewed from this perspective. The times Ryan traveled across town just to help me. The evenings he stayed awake talking when I could not sleep. The moments he celebrated my successes as if they were his own. "Why did you never tell me?" I finally asked. Ryan looked away for a moment. "Because I was afraid." The honesty in his voice surprised me. "Not because I was afraid of how you would react. I was afraid of losing what we already had." He took a breath. "You were my best friend, the person I trusted most. I kept thinking that if I said the wrong thing, I might lose the one relationship that mattered more than anything." I looked at him and realized how much courage it must have taken to carry those feelings quietly for so long. "And this week?" I asked. "Why now?" Ryan smiled sadly. "Because staying silent started feeling harder than being honest." The room became completely quiet. For years, I had thought our friendship was simple because it was easy. But maybe it was never simple. Maybe it was something much deeper that we had both been too afraid to understand. Ryan looked at me with a calm but uncertain expression. "I do not expect you to answer immediately," he said. "I just wanted you to know the truth." And for the first time all week, I understood what the suitcase, the memories, and the unexpected visit had really been about. Ryan had not only come to stay with me for a week. He had come to finally stop hiding a part of himself he had carried for years. After Ryan finished speaking, the apartment became so quiet that I could hear the steady ticking of the kitchen clock from across the room. Neither of us moved. The small box filled with old memories remained open on the coffee table between us, and somehow it felt as though every photograph, every ticket stub, and every handwritten note had been waiting for this exact moment. Ryan finally broke the silence with a gentle smile. "You do not have to say anything today," he said. I did not tell you because I expected an answer. I told you because I wanted to stop hiding from the person I trust most. I looked at him and realized how different he seemed. Not because he had changed, but because I was finally seeing him without the assumptions I had carried for years. I leaned back in my chair and slowly let my thoughts settle. One memory after another began replaying in my mind. Ryan driving across the city during a snowstorm because my car would not start. Ryan sitting beside me in the hospital waiting room when my father needed unexpected surgery. Ryan celebrating every promotion I earned as though it were his own achievement. Ryan remembering my favorite coffee order, my birthday traditions, and even the books I casually mentioned wanting to read months earlier. I had always called those things friendship because I never stopped to ask myself whether they might mean something more. Can I be honest with you? I asked quietly. Ryan nodded without hesitation. Always. I smiled faintly. When you started talking, I thought I was supposed to feel surprised. I looked toward the collection of memories spread across the table. Instead, I started realizing that every time I pictured an important moment in my life, you were already there. Ryan listened carefully, saying nothing. I kept wondering why spending this week together felt so natural. I continued. Then I understood something that should have been obvious years ago. It never felt unusual because you have always been the person who made every place feel like home. Ryan lowered his eyes for a moment, almost as though he was afraid to believe what he was hearing. I spent years trying to understand what I wanted in the future, I said. I imagined different jobs, different apartments, different cities, but no matter what I pictured, you were somehow part of it. I simply never stopped long enough to ask myself why. Ryan looked back at me with hopeful but cautious eyes. What are you saying? I laughed softly, partly because I could not believe it had taken me so long to understand my own heart. I am saying that I do not think you were the only one who misunderstood these feelings. The tension that had quietly followed us throughout the week seemed to disappear all at once. Ryan smiled, not with excitement or disbelief, but with peaceful relief. It was the smile of someone who had finally set down a weight he had carried for years. We stayed exactly where we were for a long time, talking about moments we had never discussed before. Ryan admitted the first time he realized his feelings had changed. I admitted the countless times I had missed obvious signs because I believed our friendship already explained everything. We laughed at ourselves more than once, amazed that two people who knew each other so well could overlook something so important for so long. As evening sunlight slowly filled the apartment, I realized nothing around us had actually changed. The coffee mugs were still on the table. Ryan's suitcase still stood beside the guest room. The familiar apartment looked exactly the same. The only difference was that we were finally looking at each other with complete honesty. For the first time in many years, neither of us was carrying a secret anymore, and that simple truth made the apartment feel warmer than it ever had before. The following morning arrived with an unexpected feeling of peace. For the first time since Ryan had arrived at my apartment, neither of us was pretending that nothing had changed. We still shared coffee before work, still laughed about small things, and still moved naturally around the apartment, but every conversation now carried a quiet honesty that had never existed before. It was not awkward. If anything, it felt as though we had finally stopped walking around a door that had been standing open all along. Later that afternoon, Ryan received a phone call from his landlord. I could tell from the relaxed expression on his face that it was good news. After he ended the call, he looked at me with a gentle smile. "The repairs are finished," he said. "I can move back tomorrow." Even though I had expected those words eventually, hearing them out loud left an uncomfortable silence in the room. I nodded automatically, trying to sound supportive. "That is great. I am glad everything worked out." Ryan smiled politely, but there was a sadness behind it that matched exactly what I was feeling. The rest of the evening passed quietly. We made dinner together one last time, watched half of a movie without paying much attention to it, and packed a few things into his suitcase. Every zipper closing reminded me that this week had an ending. The apartment suddenly felt too large, and I realized I had already grown used to hearing another person's footsteps in the hallway every morning. Before going to bed, Ryan stopped beside the guest room door. "Thank you," he said softly. Not just for letting me stay here. Thank you for listening. I smiled. I should probably be thanking you too. He nodded once before disappearing into the room. The next morning arrived far too quickly. Ryan carried his suitcase into the living room while I stood by the kitchen counter pretending to organize dishes that were already clean. He looked around the apartment one last time. I guess this is it, he said with a quiet laugh. I never expected 1 week to change so much. I wanted to answer immediately, but the words stayed trapped inside my thoughts. Ryan reached for the front door, placed one hand on the handle, and took a slow breath. Whatever happens after today, he said without turning around, I hope we never lose what we have built together. He opened the door and rolled his suitcase into the hallway. I watched him take several steps away before something inside me refused to stay silent any longer. Ryan. He stopped immediately. Slowly, he turned around. The hopeful expression I had seen the day before had been replaced by quiet acceptance, as though he had already convinced himself this goodbye was the right ending. I walked toward him until we stood only a few feet apart. I have been thinking about everything you told me, I said, and I realized I made one mistake. Ryan looked confused. What mistake? I smiled gently. I kept thinking this apartment felt different because you were visiting. I shook my head. The truth is, it only felt complete because you were here. His eyes widened slightly, but he remained silent. I continued before I could lose my courage. I do not want you to leave because I finally understand that the happiest parts of my life have always included you. I do not want to go back to pretending that this week was just a temporary visit. Ryan looked down for a brief moment before meeting my eyes again with the warmest smile I had ever seen. The suitcase remained standing quietly in the hallway between us, no longer looking like the symbol of a goodbye. Instead, it became the reminder of the week that finally gave two lifelong friends the courage to choose an honest future together. Ryan did not pick up the suitcase again. Instead, he quietly stepped back inside the apartment, closed the front door, and looked at me with a smile that carried years of relief. Neither of us needed dramatic words because everything that mattered had already been said. For a few moments we simply stood there, letting the silence settle around us. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that appears when two people finally stop hiding from the truth. I laughed softly. I guess we should unpack that suitcase again. Ryan smiled. I was hoping you would say that. We spent the rest of the afternoon putting his clothes back into the guest room, although before long the room no longer felt like a temporary place for a visitor. It simply became another part of our shared routine. During the following days, everything seemed familiar, yet completely different at the same time. We still woke up early, prepared breakfast together, and left for work with coffee in our hands. We still exchanged messages during lunch and talked about our day every evening. The difference was that we no longer wondered whether we were important to each other. That question had finally been answered. One Saturday morning, we walked through our favorite neighborhood farmers market, something we had done countless times before. We sampled fresh bread, laughed while comparing homemade jams, and argued playfully over which flowers would look best on the dining table. An older shop owner smiled at us and said, "You two make a wonderful team." Ryan looked at me before quietly thanking her, and I realized neither of us felt the need to explain anything. We simply smiled and continued walking together. Back at the apartment, we decided to make a few small changes. We rearranged the living room furniture, added framed photographs from our college years to one wall, and finally placed the old memory box on a bookshelf instead of hiding it inside a closet. Every photograph reminded us that our story had never started with one conversation. It had been growing through hundreds of ordinary moments that neither of us fully understood until now. One evening, while cooking dinner, I noticed Ryan preparing my favorite pasta without asking what I wanted. I laughed. "You still remember?" He looked at me with a teasing smile. "I remember almost everything." I shook my head with amusement. "I believe that now." After dinner we sat on the balcony, watching the sunset paint the Seattle skyline with warm shades of gold and orange. The city looked peaceful, and for the first time in a long while my thoughts felt just as calm. "Do you regret waiting so long to tell me?" I asked. Ryan thought about the question before answering. Sometimes I wish I had found the courage sooner. But if I had rushed the moment before either of us was ready, maybe we would not be sitting here now. I nodded because I understood exactly what he meant. Every year we had spent building trust had quietly prepared us for this chapter. Looking back, I realized there had never been one single moment that changed everything. Instead, there had been thousands of small acts of kindness, loyalty, patience, and quiet support that slowly shaped something stronger than either of us recognized. As the evening breeze drifted across the balcony, Ryan reached into the apartment, picked up the old memory box, and placed it gently between us. "I think we should keep adding to it," he said. I smiled warmly. "Only if we promise to fill it with even better memories from now on." Ryan nodded without hesitation, and together we watched the sun disappear beyond the skyline, knowing that the most meaningful chapter of our story had only just begun. 1 year later, I found myself standing in the same apartment where everything had changed. The walls looked almost the same, the kitchen still carried the familiar smell of morning coffee, and the old memory box remained on the bookshelf where we had placed it. But the person standing beside me was no longer just my best friend visiting for a week. Ryan had become the person I shared my everyday life with, the person who knew my habits, my dreams, and all. The small details that made me who I was. Looking back, it still amazed me how one unexpected week had revealed something that had been quietly growing for years. Ryan and I had always been close, but we never realized how many moments were leading us toward this chapter. Every conversation, every shared memory, and every simple act of kindness had been building a foundation neither of us fully understood. That weekend, we decided to return to one of our favorite places from college, a small park near the university where we used to spend hours talking about the future. The trees had grown taller, the walking paths had changed slightly, but the feeling of the place remained the same. We sat on a bench overlooking the quiet lake, laughing about how different our younger selves had been. "Do you remember when we thought we had everything figured out?" Ryan asked. I smiled. "We were confident about everything and completely wrong about most things." He laughed. "Especially about understanding ourselves." I looked at him and realized how true that was. We had spent years searching for answers about careers, dreams, and the future. But the biggest truth about our lives had been sitting beside us all along. Ryan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a photograph from our college years, one I had completely forgotten existed. On the back, there was a handwritten message from a much younger version of myself. It was a simple note about friendship, gratitude, and hoping we would always stay connected no matter where life took us. I smiled as I read it. "You kept this too?" I asked. Ryan nodded. "Of course." I laughed. "You really did save everything." He smiled. "Only the things that mattered." That sentence stayed with me because it perfectly described our entire journey. It was never about one perfect moment or one dramatic change. It was about countless small moments that slowly showed us what we already had. Later that evening, we returned home and added a new photograph to the memory box. It was a picture of us standing together at the park, smiling under the same sky that had watched our friendship grow over the years. I placed it carefully beside the older memories, knowing that someday we would look back at it and remember this chapter too. Ryan stood beside me and asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I never came to stay?" I thought about the question for a moment. Maybe we would have continued living our lives without understanding the truth that was already there. Maybe we would have missed the chance to become something even stronger. I smiled and answered honestly, "I think we would have found our way eventually, but I am glad we did not have to wait any longer." Ryan smiled back, and the quiet happiness between us said everything words could not. The suitcase that once represented uncertainty was now stored away in the closet, not because we needed it, but because it reminded us of the moment everything became clear. A temporary visit had become a permanent part of our story. A hidden truth had become the beginning of a new future. And the friendship that had always been the most important part of our lives had finally become exactly what it was meant to be.